Yes, folks, Greta Thunberg has been led around the world by her father Svante using climate change as a front for socialism. But first, Michael Horowitz's Pfizer abuse report is out today. But I'm going to reserve commenting on it until he comes before the Senate to answer questions in a couple of days' time. At the moment, I really can't trust any of them. Anyway, today I'm more interested in what Greta and her father have been up to. So I'll start this off with Andrew Bolt and Rowan Dean.
Child Messiah Greta Thunberg has finally sailed back to Europe from the United States, and the media is again falling for the fakery. Take the ABC, who's right on board, of course, with Thunberg's global warming religion. It reported that this 16-year-old Swedish sage travelled by catamaran instead of a plane to send a message that it is possible to live a sustainable lifestyle. Well, you have to be an idiot to think that sailing between the US and Europe is a sustainable way to travel, given that more than 70 million people each year want to fly back and forth. Imagine the queues at the yacht club. But even Thunberg's yacht trip was a fake, because no, it did not prove that she could travel sustainably. In fact, even the British skipper of that catamaran, Nicky Henderson, said the exact opposite. She said the trip was not about Greta or any of us travelling in the most sustainable way possible. It was for us to make the point that there isn't a sustainable way to travel yet, and there needs to be. And why wasn't Thunberg's trip sustainable? Well, Henderson helpfully explained. She'd had to fly to the US by plane to get to Thunberg's boat to sail it back. And she also had a diesel engine on the boat as backup.
Diesel engine.
Diesels use diesel, carbon fuel. Now, honestly, if Thunberg had simply flown back to Europe, she'd have saved the world some emissions. It was for show. Joining me for Culture Wars, as always, is Rowan Dean, author, editor of The Spectator Australia, to which I subscribe. I urge you to as well, and presenter of Outsiders on Sunday mornings. Rowan, what is the moral to this story?
Well, the moral is that if you want to virtue signal, Andrew, people are so gullible now about the climate hoax that they will just, whatever you say, if you say you're doing something that's emissions-free and you're doing it to save the planet, people are now so idiotic and gullible and that they will just buy it regardless of looking into the facts, as you said, and the ABC, none more gullible than them. Every element of that yacht, every item of clothing that Greta is wearing, every safety piece of equipment, all relies on fossil fuels to be made, and along with all the backups and all the rest. But the bigger thing here, Andrew, is that, as you alluded to, the idea that somehow what she is doing is in any way a model for the rest of the world to follow. If you were to have your 70 million people doing their transatlantic journey by yachts every year, A, it would slow our economies down to virtually nothing. And you can imagine all the same people who are now so upset about the idea of global warming. You can imagine them standing at the docks waiting for their iPhone, their latest iPhone, which is coming 6 weeks from wherever by sea, waiting desperately for their latest whatever it is to get to them. I mean, it's laughable. And
well, those that make it, don't forget, the
exactly,
drowning rate would be considerable.
Yeah, and the bottom line is that the entire world economy would collapse if you took the Greta Thunberg approach to travel and to moving goods around the planet. And you know, it's ludicrous because the death toll that would follow from that would just be horrendous.
Rowan, I'm just wondering whether there's been a change of management behind her. I mean, let's not forget, this is a 16-year-old girl who's got certain mental conditions that we've...
But hold on. She now says she doesn't have a mental illness.
Do you think that it's appropriate to have a child who you've talked about mental illness and be exploiting it in such a way?
Sorry, I think
taking her around the country, sort of, whoever gives you a Tesla, do you think that that's appropriate when you've talked about Greta's mental illness?
I don't have a mental illness.
I don't have a mental illness, she says. So she no longer has that mental illness. Anyway, back to Bolt.
Noted before, would make life a little difficult for her, and very anxiety-driven disorders. She's also been on strike from her school for an awful long time. I wonder whether the school inspectors are going to come and say, oi, come back or you're pinched. But she's suddenly started to sound a little different, you know, like she's been to some of America's most radical universities for the past few years. In the latest article, she says, and listen to this, the climate crisis is not just about the environment. She says, colonial, racist and patriarchal systems of oppression have created and fueled it. We need to dismantle them all.
Wow.
Rowan, where exactly is this crusade going and who's pointing the way?
Well, it's interesting, Andrew, because at least she's being honest now. The global warming cult has always been a socialist agenda going right back to the 70s, 80s. I think it was Maurice Strong, one of the earliest UN advocates, said, and they've all said this at various points along the line, it doesn't actually matter if the climate is changing or not, because this model now allows us to decapitalize the West and to have a huge transfer of wealth across to third world nations. That's
exactly.
That's what it's all been about, a socialist, communist-style agenda for the world. Now
you can see an example of that socialism at work here.
Here's how Greta started, with a one-woman sit-down strike.
One woman? One brainwashed girl?
Outside the Swedish parliament. And this is Svante Arrhenius. Svante Arrhenius lived from 1859 to 1927. He won the 1903 Nobel Prize for Chemistry, and he was the director of the Nobel Institute from 1905 until his death in 1927. He was the first scientist to calculate how increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide would warm the Earth. He is credited with virtually the discovery that our carbon dioxide emissions would create global warming, climate change, climate disaster is what we're facing now. Svante and Greta happen to be third and fourth cousins of Svante Arrhenius. Svante Thunberg was named after this relative.
So you can see where Greta gets her socialist indoctrination from. It's all in the family.
Now, my question is it a matter of destiny, legacy, ancestry, or just clarity?
Or just plain luck? Today we say that, you know, there's no black and white issue. But there are black and white issues. Survival is a black and white issue. Climate crisis is a black and white issue. And we need the journalists to sort of be more activist. I mean, you should take responsibility and you know, I don't know, do whatever it takes, do whatever you can't do.
Unfortunately, the mainstream media is run by money in one form or another. Money controls, money interests control. And I think humanity has to rebel against the regime of money.
Capitalism bad, socialism good.
The most surprising thing is that I realized a while ago that people don't know that we are in this emergent situation. We all say we know and we all think we all know, but we don't.
You're talking very impressively about our individual impacts on the climate. Though, isn't there something missing, considering that it's a long time ago since we could last actually grasp the impacts of our own consumerism?
Oh, once again, capitalism bad, socialism good. Anyway, now back to Rowan Dean.
They themselves have admitted it repeatedly. Even the Extinction Rebellion character, one of the founders of Extinction Rebellion himself, only last year said, oh, by the way, this climate thing is just the excuse the real agenda here is, as Greta is now saying, and as many of others had said, it's about so-called decolonizing the world. So that's just code for getting rid of capitalism around the world. The patriarchy, that's just another term for basically the West. And it's a radical communist socialist agenda. After the collapse of the Berlin Wall, they could no longer sell it on an economic basis, so they're now trying to sell socialism on an environmental basis, and she is really just mouthing what is being taught to her. Don't forget her parents, her father in particular is a radical neo-Marxist. She's just spouting what she's been brought up with.
Yes. Anyway, now back to Rebel News to see how these socialists use climate change to influence the Canadian election.
Now, perhaps the most important question that I asked this crew was why they came here in the middle of our federal election and whether or not they registered as a third-party advertiser. Greta is here in Edmonton to stage a major protest at City Hall tomorrow. It's part of her Friday climate strikes, and it lines up almost perfectly with the end of our federal elections. Most likely, it's a rally to get the vote out for their NDP and Green Party friends.
Of course it was.
Take a listen to how they responded to this question.
So will you be disclosing your finances? Will you be telling us who is paying for your trip, your Tesla, and bringing you to our country in the middle of an election?
Thank you very much. I'm paying.
You're paying for everything. You paid for the Tesla?
No one's paying for it. You borrowed the Tesla for free.
You borrowed the Tesla for free from New York.
Yeah,
Will have you registered as a third-party advertiser coming to this country in the middle of an election period? It's the middle of an election, you understand that. Have you registered as a third-party advertiser?
I'm sure she will not talk about the elections at all.
I will not. I have never mentioned the election.
You understand that climate change is a pivotal policy, is a ballot box
I'm
question in this
actually
election.
working right now, so.
This is a ballot box question in this election, and you're rallying, you're engaging in our political discourse as a foreigner. Climate change is politics, is it not?
Science.
And so is science going to solve it? Would you like a technical solution to climate change, or would you like politicians to solve it?
I'd really appreciate it if you stop talking to us right now. We have a meeting, and this is
So you're
business.
engaging in political discourse in a foreign country as a foreigner.
Thank you very much.
Will you be
This is also slightly harassing, and I do abuse contacts if need to be. So
will you be disclosing your finances, and will you be registering as a third-party operative? Will you be registering as a third-party operative?
Please, thank you very much.
thank you.
Now, right when I ask a tough question that Greta can't answer, there's no way she would be able to answer that question because really she's not on the administrative side of this campaign. She's just there to answer really easy puffball questions in press conferences. And right when I asked that question, the default response was, we're going to call the cops. We have them on speed dial. Well, I'm sorry, honey, this is Canada, this is Alberta, and we don't call the cops on journalists here. Just ask Anne McGrath, a failed NDP candidate from Calgary who used to be a communist. She tried to call the cops on me for asking tough questions, and it didn't pan out well for her. But really,
Yes, you can clearly see from that Greta and her father were using climate change as a front to influence the Canadian election. They were there for no other reason than to rally their fellow socialists.